Okay, so we've probably all seen some horrific examples of Uncanny Valley on the internet or in videos or in certain kinds of computer games. But what is it and how do we avoid it? Well, here's an example of a character that really kind of fits that nightmare mode version of Uncanny Valley. And it's a little bit hard to describe, but basically Uncanny Valley happens when you have a character in CGI or, 3D, and they have an element of realism to them, but there's other things about it that just don't look right. And usually it's because it's actually not anywhere near realism. But when you have that weird combination of some parts of the character are realistic and some parts are completely unrealistic, you get a result that tends to be freaky and scares your audience and is just not good. Now, conversely, if we take a look at a different example, we can see this one looks way better. This is something we could probably put in a high quality production or fairly high quality production, and probably not even get any complaints. And of course, that doesn't mean the model is perfect. Doesn't mean we couldn't make improvements. But overall, this is leagues better than what I just showed you. Well, it turns out that the model is actually the exact same model. But there are some important differences that separate this from this. Now, there's a couple, I'll get the simple ones out of the way and then talk about the the most critical difference and the most critical, important item that you want to take a look at when trying to avoid the Uncanny Valley. And so let's get the other things out of the way. We can take a look at the hair, and this is a basic set of hair. It's a little bit thin. We don't really have any hair shadows, and of course, even before we talk about some of the details, we have to mention that the lighting here is very basic. So, without getting too technical, the lighting here is really just for a preview. And preview lighting tends to be very direct. You usually don't have light that bounces around. It usually just bounces once. And there's some technical things to that, but that's basically it. And sometimes even on top of that, you have a whole host of lighting approximations rather than precision lighting that it mimics reality. So that alone, when you have non-realistic lighting, that alone is going to destroy your realism and is going to quickly launch something like this into Uncanny Valley, because we're trying, the proportions here are fairly realistic, but the details and the lighting are certainly not, and the materials are certainly not, and so we dive quickly into something that just doesn't work. Now, so we talked about the hair, and it's thin. It doesn't look super realistic. More importantly, we have the textures, and the skin texture, it looks good in the sense that it's detailed, but there's a couple issues. One, there's way too much contrast, and so we see all these speckles. Not only does it make the character look older, but really it's too much detail for something like this. I would even venture to say the lips are too dark as well, and so because of this, because we have too much contrast, too much detail, and of course on top of that, the lighting has too much shadow, and it just, again, going back to the realism of the lighting, the textures really throw things off. But the most important thing are the eyes. Now, I've heard it said this a long time ago that if you have, really any, let's say you have an animal, and let's say you give them white eyes, in the sense that the whites of the eyes are very bright and very easy to see. Well, it looks like that, even for something like a dog. If you give them that, if you give it to them correctly, it's going to look alive. It's going to look like it has a soul. Whereas if you have eyes that are dark, and especially in this case, not only do we have the whites of the eyes that are dark and in the shadow, but they're also pretty reddish. And I think the idea a lot of times for a lot of models that fall into Uncanny Valley is they try to, our eyes do have, red veins and reddish parts in them, but because the lighting and the materials don't match reality 100%, the reddish eye really just goes to make it look bloodshot, and the dark eyes just make it look creepy and just, like it's lifeless. And so that really is the critical element here. Let's take a look at this example to compare and contrast the two. Well, you'll notice that I've cranked up the whites to not perfect white, but something that is very, very bright. I think I've taken the red completely out. We probably could have left some of that in, but really, because this is going for more of a cartoon character style, I decided something that's pretty much perfect white, or at least for the purpose of comparing it to the rest of the scene and the rest of the face, pretty much matches what we'd expect for a consistent white color. And so we have something that is, it's much more appealing for the character, and it stands out. It gives the character a little bit of life. And yes, this is a cartoon character, so we're not going for something that's 100% realistic. But notice we kind of kept the fairly realistic proportions. Now, I will say in both examples, the eyes are a little bit bigger, I believe, than a realistic proportion would actually be. But the rest of the face, is going to not necessarily be all that far off from reality, or at least for the overall proportions. So the eye whites are pretty much the most important part. And of course, we could also mention the irises, which are nice and visible here. And of course, if we switch back, not only is the lighting dark, but the irises themselves are dark. And maybe that could work if we had brightened up the rest of the eye, but that itself, it just doesn't work. So switching back here finally, again, just to wrap up on the eyes. Yeah, you just can't make them dark unless you have everything as a part of your character perfectly. The materials are perfect and match, kind of the scientific values, really. I don't know that you can go anything less than that. If the materials are perfect, the lighting's perfect, then you might be able to go with slightly darker eyes that match real human eyes. But if you don't have that, you're working in dangerous waters if you're trying to make the eyes darker, because it's very quickly going to suck the life right out of the character, make something that looks like it belongs in a horror film rather than, in my case, say I'm trying to make something that goes for a cartoon. And it's really important to pay attention to the eyes to get that right. And yeah, there can be some variations. I have seen some, it doesn't have to always follow a cartoon style exactly. But even, the best examples that I have seen, a great example, are the Halo 2 anniversary cutscenes. You'll notice that, and these still, of course, fall into Uncanny Valley, but they don't fall quite as deep because the eye whites are actually fairly bright. They stand out, and they don't quite suck the life out of the characters the way that most Uncanny Valley characters have to deal with. So, all that to say, pay attention to the eyes. Those, you really have to get that right, and then, adjust the other things like skin and hair, and everything should follow. Now, I will mention one more thing, switching back here once more, and that is that I am using a couple different softwares here, and that may be something to consider. The first program was iClone, and it actually is a really good program, but it works better for animation than it does for rendering, in my opinion. Now, it does actually have some rendering options, and if you actually spend the time, you can get probably something closer to this. You could get that out of iClone. I'm just more familiar with Blender's rendering pipeline. So just wanted to make a note of that. The issue here is not the software is involved, it's the rendering choices, and especially the texture choices and material choices, the lighting as well, which of course all those play together, but especially the materials and textures for the eyes specifically. So hope that was helpful. Hope that was very informative. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, pressing the like button, sharing this video with friends, and hitting the notification bell to stay up to date.